Good afternoon and welcome to Congressman Roger Krishnamoorthi's Zoom Town Hall. For those of you who'd like to submit questions, please do that through the Q&A function below. And with no further ado, Congressman, would you like to welcome our audience with a few comments?
Everybody, thank you so much for joining. And Will, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everybody for joining. We've been having quite a few of these town hall meetings, probably more at a more frequent pace than perhaps we've ever had, at least during my time in office. But I think that it's really important for people to be able to have their questions answered and to address the topics of the day. Let me get to the three reasons why I wanted to have this town hall so quickly after the last one. The first is we're coming upon a government spending deadline this coming Friday, the 14th. Essentially, government funding will run out on Friday the 14th without action on the part of Congress. And right now, the Republicans have put forward what's called a continuing resolution, a 6-month continuing resolution to fund the government with current programs and slated funding. However, they do not include any protections for any of the programs or any of the funding that they are currently attempting to cut. Just as an example, last week they proposed to abolish the Department of Education. Let me just let that sink in for a moment. They proposed to abolish the Department of Education as well as all the funding streams that are associated with the Department of Education, including, for instance, Title I funding, which helps underserved communities in both red states and blue states, rural areas and urban areas. And there are no special protections offered for either that funding or any other agency or funding stream in the proposed funding package. Therefore, as of right now, without further changes and protections from the willy-nilly and radical draconian cuts that they are enacting on a daily basis through executive order, I cannot support that continuing resolution as it currently stands. Secondly, on the agenda, in addition to this government spending deadline, is what's called a reconciliation package, which my Republican colleagues are now engineering for later on in the next few months. That is meant to fund $4.5 trillion in tax cuts using roughly $2 to $3 trillion in spending cuts and another $2 trillion in deficit spending. That $2 trillion in spending cuts affects, very importantly, the safety net programs that our constituents and tens of millions of people rely on for life-sustaining services. One of them is Medicaid. Recently, Republicans passed through the House a proposal to cut upwards of $900 billion from Medicaid. That would, in essence, strip healthcare from tens of millions of Americans. I cannot possibly see how anybody could support that in good conscience. And so I wanted to bring this to your attention because it's so important and so important for Illinoisans, 3.4 million of whom rely on Medicaid every single day, and we can talk about that more. Third and final point, DOGE and Elon Musk. I and many of my colleagues want to see government operate more efficiently. We must cut waste at every opportunity. We must cut fraud out of every government program wherever we can find it, and we must look even harder. However, what Elon Musk and DOGE are doing right now in taking a chainsaw approach to our social safety net is completely unacceptable. What they're doing with regard to taking a chainsaw to government is unacceptable and dangerous. I'll just give you two examples. One is recently they actually laid off the very people who were protecting our nuclear weapons stockpile. After they realized this, they scrambled to rehire them, but they didn't have their contact info. So for a period of time, those nuclear weapons were not being safeguarded the way they should be. Another example, they laid off the very people necessary for combating the bird flu. As you know, the bird flu is decimating chickens and causing egg shortages and high egg prices and grocery prices throughout the country. Again, that makes no sense in a time when we are trying to combat inflation, not to raise prices. And so anyway, I bring these to your attention because they are top of mind for me, among other things. Obviously, I'm here for you. It's the honor of my life to represent you in the U.S. Congress now for my 5th term. Please contact me if you need anything. 847-413-1959. 847-413-1959. Or you can email me at il.08.helpline@mail.house.gov. That's mail.house.gov, or you can go to my website. Again, thank you for accommodating us. I'm here in Washington, D.C. for this important week, and I'm about to go into an Intelligence Committee hearing, but I wanted to make sure I talked to you first and had a chance to hear what's on your mind. So with that, let me turn it back to Will.
All right, Congressman, our first question comes from Nicholas. What's the point of passing a government spending bill when Elon Musk can veto any spending that he doesn't like?
Well, that's the problem. That's why I won't support the continuing resolution without additional protections. It doesn't make sense to pass a spending bill if Elon Musk and Donald Trump and others can merely cancel the appropriations or gut agencies willy-nilly. If I were to support that continuing resolution without those protections, I fear I would be giving consent to the very actions that I oppose.
Congressman, to that end, short of voting against such a package, we're being asked by, I think this is from Ron, what are you doing right now to limit what they can do in terms of shutting down government agencies? There's some questions we have about the Department of Education and apparent Trump administration efforts to close down the Department of Education without authorization from Congress. What are your feelings on that?
I think there are at least 4 things that we have to do at this point. One, we have to bring about transparency and accountability for what's happening through our oversight role in Congress, as well as lifting it up in the public through the grassroots. We saw that that has power, especially with the federal funding freeze that happened a few weeks ago. Secondly, we have to pursue litigation, both inside and outside Congress. We have to coordinate it, especially with state attorneys general and others who are affected by, for instance, Title I cuts in the Department of Education. Third, we have to use our votes. And that's why, for instance, I will not be supporting the continuing resolution without those protections that I talked about. And then fourth, we have to do everything we can to communicate, not just with me, but with all members of Congress, including my friends on the other side of the aisle, including in Illinois. They need to know that their actions in potentially supporting these cuts would be harming their constituents, and we need to get them to do otherwise. We need to practice these 4 measures as soon as possible.
Next question again goes to Mr. Musk. Is Elon Musk has seized Congress's power of the purse. What are you going to do about it? What's the point of passing a government spending bill when Elon Musk can veto any spending that he doesn't like?
Well, that's what I was just addressing a moment ago. I think that we can't get in a situation where we do things the normal way, so to speak, trusting that the executive branch and Elon Musk are going to respect our spending priorities in Congress. If we were to do that, we would be ignoring what has happened up to this point with regard to USAID, with regard to other agencies in government. What's even happening right now with regard to the DOD and the Veterans Administration. Believe it or not, they're about to fire thousands of VA staffers, the very people who are caring for our veterans, people who sacrifice for our country. So this is wrong.
All right, our next question is, this was submitted in advance online. I'm concerned about our First Amendment rights and the president picking and choosing which news companies can cover official events. what can be done to protect the freedom of the press?
This is deeply troubling. I think that what we see is, unfortunately, this is what happens we thought in other countries where leaders try to chip away at other institutions, whether it's the press or whether it's the legislative branch or whether it is judicial institutions. And unfortunately, we're seeing that happen right now with regard to the press in this country. I understand that the AP, believe it or not, the Associated Press is no longer allowed to be part of the pool of reporters covering the president because they refuse to have gone along with the president's renaming of the Gulf to be the Gulf of America as opposed to the Gulf of Mexico. That's wrong. What can we do about it? I think that we have to be supportive of the press in their litigation, which is ongoing right now. And we have to bring, again, oversight with regard to this issue in Congress. And so those are measures that I would definitely support, especially in the Oversight Committee where I sit.
All right. Next question turns to foreign policy, which would be, what are your feelings on President Trump's apparent threats and just sort of general belligerence towards Greenland, Canada, and Panama? In terms of Greenland, wanting to take over Greenland, in terms of Panama, changing the relationship or potentially regaining control of the Panama Canal, and finally, treating Canada as our 51st state, including addressing the Canadian Prime Minister as the governor.
The only people who are cheering on these types of moves are our adversaries. We need to be embracing our friends, partners, and allies around the world, not pushing them away. And what we're doing right now is we're doing the opposite. We're pushing them away and we're cozying up to, for instance, Vladimir Putin. What happened in the Oval Office the other day with regard to the treatment of Volodymyr Zelensky was disgraceful. It was absolutely disgraceful. It was not only morally wrong, as we were siding with a communist dictatorship over a freedom-loving democracy, it also makes us less safe. It makes us less safe because it emboldens people like Vladimir Putin to take more aggressive actions against us and our interests and potentially our allies in Europe. And it sends the message to Xi Jinping and others in the Indo-Pacific that they should know that we might treat Taiwan and others the same way that we are treating Ukraine. And so I think we would slide closer to conflict when we distance ourselves from our friends, partners, and allies like Canada and others, not move away from it.
Congressman, on the question of Ukraine, President Trump has frozen direct U.S. aid to Ukraine and has also frozen intelligence support. What can Congress do to rectify that, or is this a holding pattern we're trapped on until there's a potential peace agreement?
Well, I think that right now I'm about to go into an Intelligence Committee hearing, and this is going to be one of the topics. And so I am going to raise this particular issue, especially on the intelligence sharing, but also on the pause in military aid, because again, it makes us less safe. And so we have an oversight role that we need to perform in Congress as best as we can to make sure that our appropriations are directed in the proper fashion. And by the way, that's another reason why the continuing resolution as it currently is structured doesn't make sense. Because if the president is going to, for instance, cancel military aid or pause military aid to a friend, partner, or ally because he just feels like it, then there's no reason why I should be giving consent for that in the form of supporting this continuing resolution.
Congressman, we have a question from JR here. JR writes, I heard that Trump thinks we may be heading toward a recession, but that it won't hurt us. How can a recession not hurt us?
Of course it will hurt us. Recessions always hurt the American people. Why? Because unemployment goes up. People lose their jobs. Not only that, but the American government is harmed because our revenues go down and our deficit situation gets worse. And so I don't know what he's talking about in terms of a recession not hurting us. It may not hurt him. It will hurt the American people, however.
And Congressman, we have a number of questions about the post office, including Postmaster General DeJoy, but also the general question of whether the post office is going to be privatized. So could you speak to the future of the USPS and what's happening under the Trump administration to our postal service?
Fortunately, the USPS has suffered greatly under the leadership of Louis DeJoy. I think I've talked about this on several town halls in the past, but Louis DeJoy has unfortunately provided leadership that has seen service standards slip so that your mail and my mail arrives a lot more slowly than it did in the past. And at the same time, prices are going up on stamps. I've lost count of the number of times that the price of a stamp has gone up in the last 4 years. And yet that is the situation in which we find ourselves. And as a consequence, the USPS's business model is suffering, right? When prices go up and service standards are going down, guess what? People use the mail less, and that's what's happening. On top of that, now the Trump administration is talking about somehow privatizing the Postal Service, which, as you know, is a public service. It is not one that is meant to make a profit. 50 million addresses in the country would not be profitably served under the Trump administration's business model. Does that mean we stop serving them with the U.S. mail? No, it doesn't. That's not how it works. And so I'm opposing the privatization of the U.S. mail service. I'm also opposing the dissolving of the USPS's administration and merging into the Commerce Department, because that would politicize the USPS again. The whole reason why it is separate is because in the 70s, it became too politicized. And so they wanted to make it an independent body. And now we're going the opposite direction, unfortunately.
We also have a few notes, Congressman, from people who are commenting that they saw your op-ed on this issue in the Chicago Tribune today. So I wanted to flag that as well.
Thank you. Yes, I talk a lot about the USPS. I love the U.S. mail. It is still, I love the people who work at the USPS. They helped bind the country, especially during the pandemic. They delivered the medicine. They delivered the small business payments and parcels. They delivered all the other correspondence that you and I and everybody relies upon. And oh, by the way, they delivered your letters to me and my letters to you as constituents to help to deliver the services that you need. So we have to stand by the USPS, and I hope that all of you agree with me.
Congressman, this next question comes from Troy. He's a 100% service-connected disabled veteran. Troy writes, what is the plan to save the VA and prevent veteran disability from being cut off?
First of all, Troy, thank you for your service. We can't express enough gratitude for what you've done for our country. This is one of those sets of cuts that really bother me a lot. Basically, there are thousands of layoffs that are slated for the VA, and these are people who are some of the frontline employees, they're probationary employees, they're younger, they're some of the most talented, energetic people at the VA, and it doesn't make any sense to let them go. And so, again, I hope that you'll join me in doing those 4 things I talked about before. And I'm also going to be working with my colleagues on the VA committee to perform oversight here. But those 4 things, again, are we have to make the stories known about what's about to happen. We have to rally the court of public opinion so that everybody understands what's at stake. 2, there is litigation, again, with regard to the VA, and we need to be supportive of it, both in Congress and outside. 3, we have to use our votes, both in committee, in the committee of jurisdiction, and otherwise, to use as leverage for preventing these cuts. And then 4, we've got to converse with our Republican colleagues as well on this issue, people in Illinois, but also outside, to get them to see that this is wrong and their constituents are going to be harmed.
All right. I'm combining and distilling a few questions here in the interest of time. but the most direct version is from Mary, who asks, if finding fraud is important, then why did the administration fire all the inspectors general?
Well, that's the point, Mary. I keep raising, which is the inspectors general. I believe in the last fiscal year identified $95 billion in waste, fraud, and abuse, uh, and they perform a vital role in making sure that our legislative prerogatives are actually carried out within the executive branch. I know a lot of these inspectors general, they testify before us all the time. They're good men and women who just want to do their job and trying to make these programs better and more efficient. When you fire the inspectors general, the message that you send is that you're not really as interested in finding waste, fraud, and abuse as you are in basically either covering up stuff that you're doing that you don't want other people to find out, or you're also trying to politicize those individuals. You want them to kind of toe your line. And that's exactly the opposite of what we want the inspectors general to be doing.
We're receiving a number of questions where people are asking what they can do, including a question from Doreen and another question from Rabbi Klein, who specifically asks, how do we reach legislators on the other side or not in our district? So what can people do, and what can they also do to legislators whose district they aren't living in, who might be on the other side of a party, of an issue, et cetera?
Well, look, I think that a lot of you are opinion leaders. A lot of you have friends, family, colleagues, business associates, clients in other districts. I please encourage you to have conversations with them and ask them to contact their members of Congress. Now, you can do so as well. And we routinely receive correspondence and phone calls from people in other districts, and we treat them, and also requests for help, by the way. We treat them the same as though they came from our own district, and we adopted a policy such as that, especially because of the pandemic, where everybody needed help. However, you're talking to your friends, family, and neighbors and loved ones about this and asking them to do the same advocacy that you are is incredibly powerful. And if they're willing to do that, I guarantee you that is something that is heard by the offices. We track our phone calls, our correspondence very carefully and with a lot of detail, and I know that other offices do the same.
All right, Congressman, we're getting a number of questions about balancing the budget. There's been a lot of talk about DOGE and it's cutting spending, cutting fraud, cutting waste. But given your opposition to that, people are asking, what do you think we should be doing to help balance the budget?
Well, it's a good, tough question. And this is what I believe. We cannot sustain a $36 trillion debt. It doesn't make any sense. It's wrong. It's wrong to put that on the backs of our children and grandchildren, and expect our country to flourish with that amount of debt. However, the only way that you can tackle that debt, in my opinion, is to do so in a bipartisan fashion and on the revenue and the expense side. Let's just take a couple items that I talk about frequently, which unfortunately have yet to be taken up, which I think would make a difference. One, on the spending side, the biggest driver of expenditures with, for instance, Medicare right now is prescription drugs and pharmaceuticals. By far, it's the biggest driver. It's basically eating Medicare alive. And so the best way to deal with that is to negotiate the price of prescription drugs. And when the Biden administration started this process with the first 10, just 10 drugs, that's it. It was slated to be able to save $50 billion over 10 years. Imagine if we could do that for all the prescription drugs that we buy through Medicare Part D. It would be a tremendous savings. We need to do more of that throughout the federal government, but especially on prescription drugs. Secondly, on the revenue side, Social Security. Unfortunately, the cap on earnings subject to Social Security taxes is too low. It was set at a certain amount a long time ago, but as you know, incomes have gone up And the people that are being taxed to fund our Social Security, that burden disproportionately falls on middle and lower classes. And so we've got to raise that cap. We've got to raise that cap so that we can have greater contributions into the Social Security system to sustain our safety net. So those are just two examples, and there are more, of course.
Relatedly, the New York Times columnist Ezra Klein often jokes that if you look at federal spending, our country is essentially an insurance company with an army. To that end, you just spoke to the insurance company and retirement side of it. Jeff writes in, do we need to cut military spending as we're wrestling with all these spending questions?
So on the military spending, we got to spend it better. There's no doubt about it. I think that there is inefficiency in our military spending, and we've got to cut the waste. One of the reasons, by the way, why we have that waste is because we don't have enough competition in a lot of areas of military procurement. That's something that I've been fighting for a lot. I think we need to have small businesses participate more. As a former small business person who had to sign the front of the check and the back of the check, I know it's hard to run a small business, but it would mean the world to a small business to get even a small contract from the DoD for cutting edge or innovative technology, but they are not able to compete with the big incumbents to get those. I'd like to see many more of those small businesses be able to participate, because I think when you have more competition, you have lower prices, you have better technology, and you have more choices.
All right. Congressman, we have another question. What will happen if the executive branch, including the presidency, but also Doge, Elon Musk's efforts, and others, what happens if the executive branch ignores federal court orders?
Well, that's a constitutional crisis. So far, the executive branch has not, either with regard to the Supreme Court or with regard to lower courts. But we should be constantly rallying the court of public opinion in favor of making sure that we observe the rule of law and that we always follow what the courts say. I think that's incredibly important, and that's obviously the difference between a society that's governed by law and that one that's governed by violence. We cannot have the latter, and we must do everything we can to keep bolstering our institutions, including our courts.
Congressman, we have a number of questions on oversight, many citing that you serve on the Oversight Committee, that you're the ranking member on the Healthcare and Financial Services Subcommittee there. The questions center on how can Democrats pursue oversight, especially when they're in the minority, and there's Republican control of the committees, which are generally defending him. So while operating as the minority party, how can you provide oversight of this president?
Well, I think you do it a couple ways. One, you try to get witnesses who can speak to what's going on in the presidency. We Democrats on the Oversight Committee came within one vote, just one vote short of successfully subpoenaing Elon Musk to come before our committee. I think he absolutely should testify under oath before the committee and explain what the heck is going on with Doge and his own activities. So that's one thing that we have to do always, which is keep pressing for that accountability. The second thing is there are witnesses who come before the committee, and we need to question them hard. We need to grill them. I don't care who they are, but we need to perform that vital function to basically elevate issues and make sure that people are held accountable and that people understand the stakes. So just as an example, Louis DeJoy came before our committee, and I think it's fair to say that I gave him a pretty good grilling. One of the things that got a lot of people's attention is I showed him all the pictures of the post offices in our district, in the 8th district, that had parcel and mail piled up, strewn all over the post USPS stations, and basically things, notes being written saying that the mail was not delivered. They actually documented that the mail was not delivered. And so I presented them to him in public, And some of those moments got a lot of attention because he had to answer for that, and he had no good answers. As I talked about before, that's in part why I'd like to see him go and be replaced with career USPS administrators.
All right. Congressman, to turn to some of the immigration questions we're getting, can you speak to the Trump administration's efforts to crack down on immigration, to launch a large number of raids, to flip a number of the orders and policies the Biden administration and previous administrations had in terms of what would limit where raids could happen, and just how you balance the need for enforcing immigration laws, but doing so humanely?
I think that I think most of my colleagues and I would be in favor of fixing the border and our legal immigration system in a bipartisan fashion. That is the number one priority that we should set forward for all of us, because if we do that, I think we'll be doing the people's will. We'll be improving the legal immigration system, which to me is still a great source of strength for our country. However, the Trump administration has decided on these different raids, and I think that we should make sure that violent criminals and folks who have broken the law and have deportation orders be removed. But when you basically target schools, churches, hospitals, and other places for these raids, a very different message comes across, and people are living in fear. Not only that, it looks like innocent people are being swept up with more nefarious actors. We have direct reports of potential U.S. citizens, as well as green card holders, visa holders, legal residents being swept up in these raids. That's wrong. And so we need to, again, hold the Trump administration accountable. They are going to come to us for more money for ICE and for DHS. If they want that more resources, if they want those greater resources, we're going to have a different implementation of some of these immigration provisions. Oh, let me just add one thing. I hate to drop this piece of news, but I have to because I wrote a letter about it on Friday. All of us were horrified by a Muslim ban that was put in place in the very first week of the Trump administration back in 2017. I was the first member of Congress to go to O'Hare International Airport to help free a couple dozen Muslim American green card holders. And unfortunately, what we've learned last week is that another version of this Muslim ban may be on its way. And so we will apprise you of more details as soon as we receive them. But I wrote a letter to the president asking for clarification and asking him, requesting and demanding that he not engage in another blanket Muslim ban, this time potentially involving even Pakistan. We have many Pakistani Americans in our district who could potentially be affected as well. It's the wrong thing to do. It's morally wrong, but it's also going to hurt our economy as well. And I think this type of blanket treatment of people merely because of where they come from is un-American.
All right, Congressman, we also have a question from Tim regarding, are you concerned about the attempts? You already mentioned that there are some green card holders who are being swept up in these immigration raids. Tim wonders if you're worried about the Trump administration's policies where they're potentially trying to strip some people of their green cards at the same time that they're trying to sell what President Trump is calling a gold card, which would be essentially a green card that could be purchased by very wealthy people for $5 million each. So that's the question about taking away green cards from those who hold them right now, who have views or records that the administration doesn't like, as well as the plan to potentially sell $5 million a piece green cards to wealthy people from overseas.
Well, this is very disturbing. I heard about this, I think on NPR, that someone's legal permanent residency was being revoked because of their views with regard to certain foreign policy issues. And I have not heard of this happening before, and now I am deeply concerned about it. I also think, by the way, I should just mention this because I've learned this recently. Green card holders should carry their documents with them. And I just strongly suggest, in light of what I said before with regard to the Muslim ban, please consult with us if you would like to get an opinion with regard to travel, foreign travel that's coming up. I just think that the ports of entry can be very challenging places to be on the return, especially if they might be looking into your green card status or your visa status from the past. So that we're happy to talk to you about that in more detail. With regard to a green card and a gold card and a platinum card and every other type of idea that the president has, let's talk about it. But let's have comprehensive immigration reform. Okay, let's not make it so it's almost impossible if you go through the regular vetting queue, let's say for an H-1B holder, that it will take you 100 years to matriculate from an H-1B into a green card if you come from a certain country, for instance. That doesn't make any sense. So let's talk about the president's ideas. I'm all ears, but let's fix our legal immigration system. Let's fix our border at the same time. Let's do it in a bipartisan fashion.
Congressman, we're getting some questions on tariffs as to both whether you support them, if the president has the power to implement these large-scale tariffs, not just on China, but also on Canada and Mexico, our two biggest trading partners, and what Congress can do to potentially rein him in if he pursues these tariffs further.
Well, first of all, I think that, these tariffs, especially if they are imposed on our friends, partners, and allies like Canada, make no sense. These blanket tariffs make no sense. Basically, what they are tax increases on Americans because Americans end up paying the tariffs. Not only that, but then our farmers and other producers are subject to retaliatory tariffs. So you get the double whammy, especially for a state like Illinois, which is so heavily dependent on trade with Canada. In general, I'm not opposed to tariffs as a concept, especially where we are trying to level the playing field, such as with China, where they are routinely engaging in dumping of goods to destroy their competition, including in the United States. However, blanket tariffs, especially on Canadian goods, makes no sense. We in Congress have authority with regard to tariffs, especially under the USMCA and other similar laws. The president is invoking emergency authority, and I think that is being litigated as we speak.
Congressman, among his wide range of other recent comments, Elon Musk referred to Social Security as a Ponzi scheme. Do you agree, and do you think that it should be cut as he and some of his supporters have come out for it?
No and no. It should not be cut. It's not a Ponzi scheme. It's an earned benefit. You put money into the program and you receive money upon retirement, and we need to protect it.
Relatedly, Congressman, can you speak to the situation with Medicaid, how in danger it is, and what kinds of tools do you and other Democrats in Congress have to prevent those Medicaid cuts that we've been hearing so much about in the news?
It's definitely in jeopardy. I can't say enough about Medicaid. Medicaid in Illinois covers 3.4 million people. By the way, 60% of whom are working. It covers 50% of births. It covers 2/3 of people in nursing homes. So this is like one of those programs that affects virtually every family in some way. So when we're talking about cutting Medicaid, it's going to affect every family in some way, and it's going to affect our healthcare system. Why? Because even our hospitals that are in good areas, certainly the ones in rural areas, certainly the ones in inner city Chicago and in urban areas, are heavily dependent on Medicaid revenue. So if you're going to cut Medicaid, basically you're going to throw a monkey wrench into the healthcare systems of all Illinoisans. And so we should all be concerned. What do we do about it? Now, again, I go back to what I said before. we have to raise our voices. We have to also hold people accountable. That means people on the other side of the aisle too, who represent a lot of these areas that are going to be jeopardized by these Medicaid cuts. And we need to do so now.
All right, we have a question now from Abigail, who's a high school student. Abigail wants you to discuss the impact of pardon me, on how can things get better for Gen Z high school students like me, and how is that going to impact us? Is President Trump going to change that? And relatedly, there's a question about President Trump passing large tax cuts, which will add to the deficit and make things worse for those future generations. So what would you say to those Gen Z high school and college students and just anyone concerned about the future of the country as well as the deficit?
Well, Abigail, thank you for the question. Quite frankly, I think the reason why so many of us are concerned is because we're concerned about you. We're concerned about our children. We're concerned about our future. Our children are our future. And so what I would say is you need to get more engaged now, not less. And you need to, make your opinions known, obviously to people like me, but also to other elected officials. And you need to do it now. I think and one of the reasons, again, why I'm having so many town halls so frequently is because I feel that the next, let's say 90 days, 120 days, the next 3 or 4 months are going to be so crucial in defining our near future in terms of the horizon of what's possible with the federal government to help our young people, our seniors, in terms of their education, but also the social safety net, and also the trajectory of our country. Because, as the ranking member of this committee that's centered on the competition between the U.S. and the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, essentially what I notice over and over again is only our adversaries would be cheering for these Doge-like chainsaw kind of attacks on our federal government right now. Our adversaries would be cheering because we are basically harming our own ability to compete. We're not investing in science. We're cutting science. We're not upgrading the skills of our workforce. We're cutting the Department of Education. We're not investing in technologies of the future. We're instead talking about cutting assistance to graduate students at universities across the country who are doing the groundbreaking research of the future. So I need you to make your voice heard. I need you to do everything you can to keep engaging as you are right now, because it counts. Now is the time when it counts.
Congressman, President Trump has already withdrawn the United States from the Paris Climate Accord. He's withdrawn the United States from supporting the World Health Organization. There's this general rolling back of U.S. engagement with international institutions. So in light of that, we have the question, do you feel President Trump will withdraw the United States from the United Nations? And how can we stop that?
I don't know if he's gonna do that. I strongly believe that our presence at the United Nations is essential for our security, our national security. Forget every other reason why it's important. But if we leave the United Nations, we cede leadership to our adversaries, including the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, and others. They would absolutely be relishing us stepping away from the world stage. Why? Because they would then curry more influence with those whom they seek to get on their side in terms of changes in the international order, international rules, being able to just invade your neighbors, violate people's sovereignty, trample on human rights, and the list goes on and on. That is not the world that we can leave for our children or others. Again, in Congress, we have to do whatever we can to both shed light and bring transparency to it, and then secondly, use the power of the purse however we can to protect funding for the UN and other institutions that are vital for our security.
Congressman, our time's running short, so I can turn to what I believe will be our final question. This was submitted in advance by email, but the constituent writes, I'm at a loss for what is happening in our federal government right now. I know the only way I can do anything is getting involved in local government. I guess I'm just not sure where to start. I would like some direction. What can I do?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. On April 1st, we actually have municipal elections in Illinois, and specifically throughout our area in the 8th Congressional District. I hope that you participate in those elections. If you're able to vote, you should vote. Again, I don't pretend to tell you who to vote for. These are nonpartisan elections. But if you believe in any of these candidates, help them. Help them get elected. We need normal government that helps people. And I don't care if you're a Republican, Democrat, or independent. If you have a heart to help people at the local level or any level, we need you involved. We need your help. We don't want a situation where the government, as we are in Washington, is violating what I believe to be the first principle of government, which is do no harm. Unfortunately, we are doing harm right now in cutting the social safety net and hurting vital institutions. And we've got to do the opposite. And that's why, again, please lift up your voices, engage with your elected officials, including me, but also my colleagues and others. Help those not-for-profits and others with their activities in the private sector to the extent that you can. And then finally, we need to hold our friends accountable on all sides with regard to the decisions that they're going to make in the coming weeks and months.
All right, I think we're coming to the end of our time. We've recorded today's town hall, so we'll be posting that to the Congressman's social media. So if you, friends or family, want to watch this or didn't have the chance to watch it today, it'll be available there. Congressman, do you have any closing remarks before we end the town hall?
Yes. First of all, let me just mention my phone number, 847-413-1959. If you need anything, just call me, call us. We have a wonderful staff of people who are dedicated to helping you. And that is by far the most important thing that I do in my current role. I just want to close with this, which is that I need everybody to stay tuned, stay engaged. I need everybody to lift up their voices where they see problems, bring it to my and our attention. I will do everything in my power to help. But right now, I know that people are concerned, but we need to transform that concern and maybe even fear into action, because the opposite is paralysis, and we can't be paralyzed. We need to act. Our country is too important, and everything that we hold near and dear are too important for that. So please stay engaged. Thank you so much.
Thank you for everyone for attending. And again, you can watch this on repeat on the Congressman's social media, and you'll be receiving emails on the Congressman's upcoming town halls as soon as they're scheduled. Thank you very much.